Today's episode of Islam in Focus explores the concept of role models, or qudwa in Arabic. What does it mean to have a role model? What does it mean to be a role model? Can admiration become idolization? And if so, where lies the balance? To address these questions and many more, we welcome to the studio tonight Wasim Kempson, an Imam at the West London Cultural Centre, and Bilal Dunn, the CEO of Noor Initiative. Assalamu alaikum. We come across terms such as qudwa, uswa and imama in the Quran. What do they really mean?
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ba'd. These three terms, imama, qudwa and uswa, if you like, you can put them into one word in English, and it's the title of the show, really. It's a role model and being an example.
Yeah.
And these two terms in particular, i.e. qudwa and uswa, are referred to or placed next to two of the greatest prophets that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent to mankind, i.e. being Ibrahim alayhi salam and Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So these were the two greatest role models, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions specifically these two as being a role model for us, and in fact all of mankind.
But what is it that we are demanded of, or is demanded of us in terms of treating our role models and how we should treat role models? What does it really mean to be a role model?
I mean, to be a role model, it's not necessarily something that you may choose to be. You don't necessarily, I'm going to be a role model. It is something which maybe people look to you to be a role model because of the particular characteristics or the goodness and whatever traits that you may have. Now, for a Muslim, it's important for us to understand that being a role model, and all of us have different roles in our lives. Some of us may be fathers, some of us may be managers, all different roles. That it comes with the territory. That if you're going to take that responsibility, that by default you will be, if you like, a role model. So it comes with a great responsibility. So therefore, in each context, or each responsibility that you have, you really need to know what is expected of you to ensure that you carry out the necessary job or work that is due, so the people who are under your guardianship or those you are supposed to guide will do what is expected of them as well.
And are role models in the Quran specifically only prophets, or there are other figures also mentioned as role models for other things?
No, not necessarily prophets. You find, for example, Luqman, who was a very wise individual, who, according to the vast majority of scholars, who's not a prophet. You find a whole chapter in the Quran called Surah Luqman, and part of that chapter is dealing with the advice that Luqman gave to his son. So you don't have to be a prophet. You can be a very wise person like Luqman, alayhi salam, and then
Okay, Brother Bilal. What is understood to be a role model in today's society? Out there, you come in contact with young people, you come in contact with, I know you work with offenders. What does it mean to them to have a role model?
I think it means a lot to them to have a role model. And I think what you tend to find is some of the social deficits that are created as a result of people not really having anybody that they can look to are huge in many instances. I think to be a role model, you need to be able to manage responsibility on a tangible level, in the same way that Shaykh Wasim has described, whatever capacity that is. But I think for young communities, I think sometimes what they can be attracted to is an alternative lifestyle choice, or maybe the dominant culture, if you want to call it that. And sometimes they kind of aspire and seek, models of behavior that are kind of contrary to what we would expect from Islam. And this is probably one of the biggest challenges we have, as a community of Muslims.
What about celebrities? Aren't celebrities paraded as role models for people? And are they not de facto the role models in modern society?
I think the whole premise of the role model in celebrity is really based on material acquisition and doing as little as possible and earning as much as possible. And I think the whole celebrity culture has probably got a lot to say to that. But I certainly wouldn't argue the point that these are tangible role models that we should really try to have our communities emulate. I think there's a huge danger in that.
And do you think young people do care about having a role model these days, or do you think it's something of the past as suggested by certain social scientists in the media?
Absolutely key. I mean, you tend to find in the communities that I work with that if given the opportunity to do good, most people will do good. But it just depends on how that's presented. If it's presented as something plausible, if that particular lifestyle choice is presented as something plausible, and it's done so and it comes from a source which is credible, you would tend to find that they would become more inclined to adopt that as a behavior.
And what type of quality? You mentioned about counterculture, you mentioned about alternative lifestyle. What type of qualities do you think young people or general masses look out for in potential role models?
Integrity, probably first and foremost. A young person is always going to be looking to an elder or somebody, a community activist, somebody who operates in a very visible position in the community, and begin to try and unpick that person's level of integrity. And once that is unsuccessful, then it kind of galvanizes that person's respect. So I think that's the first thing that people look for is integrity in order for them to be able to determine who a role model is.
Okay. Shaykh Wasim, we've just started on that topic of what makes a role model or what people look out for in their role model. In your opinion, Islamically, what makes a good role model? What is a good role model?
I think it's important for us to understand that, we are a creation and that we have certain instincts with us being, humans. And that we will ultimately, being human beings, we generally, we live in groups of people. And then when living in groups of people, we will look to one another. Naturally, it's something that is built within us. So we will look to one another and benefit from one another. And then when you see something within somebody that you like, that you will try to follow that. You will try to emulate that. So that person, whether it's an action or something that they have done, depending on how big or small that is, they become a role model to you within what you are following them in, whether it's entirely or it's within that specific issue that you are following them in. Now, Islamically, what defines a good role model for us? Now, the ultimate role model for us is our beloved Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the prophets in general, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose them to be people who are going to deliver a message, how we should live. This is what you should do and this is what you shouldn't do. And as a Muslim, in part of our submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we should follow them in that. So entirely that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is a role model for us, entirely. There are not aspects of his life, alayhi salam, that we say, no, I don't want to do that. Although you may not be able to do everything, at least within yourself you think that if the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he did that and this is what makes him a good role model, if you like, for mankind, then I will try to emulate that. Now, certain actions and certain statements that he did were passed on through people, and you may find that good aspect in another person. So then you try to follow that person as well. It doesn't mean that you are, worshipping, that person. You're following them in that action or what you deem to be good within that person.
So you're suggesting that perhaps, like the Prophet ﷺ being the ultimate role model for Muslims, that you can find examples of a great father, if you're a father, to follow that example in the Prophet ﷺ. If you're a statesman, you find that example of a good statesman. If you're a businessman, you find the example of a good businessman in the Prophet ﷺ. And so you're suggesting that the prophets are more universal in holistic, in that everything that they do can be taken as exemplary.
For sure. Everything that they did is something that we are, encouraged at time, and other times we are, we must and we're required to implement certain aspects of their life, for example. So, as a Muslim, it is very important for us to identify what it means to understand what a role model is, and to know what they stand for, and to understand then, when it is passed on to other people, that I am required also to follow that as well. So you mentioned, a father. A father is the most important male role model in the life of any child. That's the first male role model that they will come in contact with. Now, any goodness and what the son or the daughter may see in their father, and that they would try to emulate them. Where did that come from? As a Muslim, we would say then obviously that came from guidance from the prophets and messengers, because we deem that to be the best way to live our lives.
Okay, Brother Bilal. So what makes a bad role model in that case?
I think somebody that doesn't adhere to the practices that the Shaykh has subscribed to and recognized. I think a lack of integrity as well. I mean, although it's kind of claiming the obvious pretty much. But I mean, somebody who doesn't really have an understanding or a level of direction in terms of the way or the trajectory that he wants his life to take, in terms of the precepts of Islam. I would say that a bad role model would be somebody who, you know, has a poor understanding of himself and his environment. And an ability to be able to assist people from his own environment. I think, you know, a role model has two roles. I mean, one is to support those that he finds in his, you know, the environment that he orbits, and also to allow himself to be supported when that's appropriate in many cases. I think some people can kind of view a role model as being somebody that's going to be fiercely independent. But sometimes, you know, you can actually admire somebody's humbleness and their akhlaq by allowing themselves to be supported in that role when they need it. I know that I've found the akhlaq of some individuals extremely attractive in terms of allowing themselves to be supported when that's needed. And I've found sometimes the fiercely independent kind of role that some people have can be, you know, quite unattractive sometimes.
But in reality, people today, as you said, Shaykh Wasim, earlier, that you start taking role models of people who are around you, good things that you see in them, you try and start emulating them naturally as human instinct. What is wrong with a person who says, for example, oh, you know, I thought Osama bin Laden was a guy who was very courageous, and I take him as my role model for courage, or Madonna as an iconification of very great talent, and for talent, I'm going to take her as my role model, and Mo Farah is great as a runner, and I'm going to be really good as a runner. Is there anything wrong with that?
Asking me?
Yeah.
I am not necessarily, no, because we don't restrict a role model only to the prophets and messengers, as we mentioned, alayhim salatu wasalam. We find there are role models, there are great people that existed that other than prophets, like Luqman alayhi salam. So following that down, if you like, that you may find a certain individual who had a very good trait within them.
Yeah.
And even that person, if you like, could technically be non-Muslim.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if they have a trait which is beneficial, which is good, and they show kindness, for example, and helping a lot of people. A good example, if you like, is Nelson Mandela, okay, who was a great statesman and a great leader for his people.
Yeah.
Now, he was a person who, you know, suffered great oppression throughout his life, and then when, you know, upon being released from prison, became a president of a country, and removed apartheid, removed oppression, removed so many things. So that trait that he had within him is something that, you know, a Muslim would like to aspire, because this is a common matter for us in, you know, the removal of oppression, for example, or the removal of harm to people. So taking, if you like, Nelson Mandela as a role model, I would like to be somebody like him, to have that position, so that I can then, you know, do something and have a positive impact on people. Okay. So again, it's not necessarily when you sometimes as Muslims become very restrictive. You can only have Muslim role models, and you can only have Sahaba, and you know, of course, they are the greatest of role models for us. No one is going to doubt that. But at times we have to live in the world that we are living in now, and that sometimes we need a real example for us to come close to. So then we can take that stepping stone to realize what it is to have a bit, you know, you see a great statesman amongst your own time. And then when you see that and you're taken aback by it, then you can take it to the next level. For example, looking, for example, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu in the Khilafah that he had just over 2 years, and the great victories and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave to him. So then you can, instead of jumping to Abu Bakr, it becomes something very abstract. It becomes, you know, something you read in a book, and it's very difficult for you to link with. Whereas if you can take something in your modern time and something that's real to you, and then you can appreciate that, and then you can take that next step possibly. And some people need that step. Sure.
So if somebody takes a non-Muslim as a role model, for example, Nelson Mandela, and then they are influenced by that person, they admire that person, would you not think also that there are aspects of Nelson Mandela's life which are not in agreement with Islamic principles and values that will also have an impact on the person who takes Nelson Mandela as a role model?